Hello there, and welcome to the value of everything. So, I have been a little bit of a sort of on the more anarcho-capitalist moral sense of putting forward ideas in terms of a world which is free from any kind of governance whatsoever. So, really, I'm going to try something a little bit new. I don't really want to sort of say this as to be my actual true thoughts, or this is the way that I think, but I'm just going to try and apply thoughts of the Zeitgeist movement and see if it can work in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so let me get out of this car park. Right, so the Zeitgeist movement is more so a way to rid ourselves of this horrible government which is totally in a system of consumerism and automation and destroying really lives, and really there is an immense amount of abundance which is being created in the world, and yet so little few people are really obtaining any kind of there's not really a good distribution of any of this abundance which is occurring in this world. We are finding that there is a lot of people that are finding themselves unskilled. There's a massive load of deindustrialization. There is obviously there's some very greedy fat cats which are really creaming off the land, and they're using political power to get what they want, and it is a disastrous effect not only on people but on the environment and nature and a number of things. So there is one idea of the Zeitgeist movement to combat all of these incredibly damaging issues. I obviously have different selections of where I think a lot of the problems lie, but I think we can definitely explore it from the Zeitgeist movement. Now, I understand that the Zeitgeist movement would like to approach this thing in a little bit of a political sense, maybe require power to do this. Now, this goes a little bit against the grain as to the way in which I would like to enable a certain amount of freedoms, but we will try and explore it in terms of a power sense. Now, how would a power system be able to be hard-coded to create abundance and be enabling to be as productive as possible, so that mankind can produce more and more goods and be very selecting as to what goods are the most valuable for people and what goods are the least valuable for people. So we require some kind of monetary or valuation system based upon sustainability. So let's just put it into certain simple factors. So there is energy which is required for us to do a lot of tasks in the world. So if we could potentially get some ideas or statistics or measurements in terms of the amount of energy which can be consumed, once we have got an idea or a certain level of a measurement, let me say the word, then we can put this all into a computer system, or we can start to arrange it in an accordance way and decide on certain particular mandates which will further human progress as quickly as possible. So energy is really, it does seem to be one of the sticky spots. Also the sustainability of the environment itself. So let's just say that we really don't want to destroy the planet Earth by mankind. So really, in those terms, we have got two sort of mandates. We need to find an increasing amount of energy so that we can do a lot more with what we have on this planet, and we need to use certain algorithms or certain calculations to work out a way in which we can use resources in a ecological way without damaging the environment. Okay, so this is a little bit of a problematic part in itself, because you are trying to predict things which have got a very moving target. Now, you may have certain, if you've got in power, certain people that are scientists or anything else who are working towards making energy, better energy or more efficient energy, or really extracting energy directly from the sun in a direct manner, or creating a new sun on the planet and creating some fusion or fission on the planet Earth, which is safe and sustainable. Then all of a sudden the entire calculation model has to be re-augmented to this new paradigm of enhanced energy. And also there's obviously a number of other factors including on this in terms of the amount of production and the amount of goods that we should be requiring. Okay, so this is one. Now, I believe that the Zeitgeist movement wants to create super cities which can work in some kind of structure in terms of finding things which people would like to do instead of others, and finding a way in which computers and automations can work to free up people and to provide certain levels of abundance to people, and shall we say a sustainable level of food and nutrition and things like that. So it is a little bit tricky in these terms, because we are trying to provide for all dependent on seasonal factors. So there would need to be some kind of algorithm in place to look at the seasonal factors, see how the seasons move. Really, you're going to be really studying meteorology and really looking at the study of farmland. But there would probably need to be some kind of level of, let's say, planned accuracy in terms of how the farmland was being worked on, and what was the average yields, and if there was any problems with the crop yield or any surpluses with the crop yield, what would be the occurrences, or what would be the system fallout for these situations. So obviously one of the problems with not having a typical pricing mechanism, or changing the pricing mechanism to essentially run power, is that you cannot predict the price of what something is going to be in the future. So it's a very tricky thing, dependent on, you can't quite, unless you go down the route of dictating a lot of things, from determining how many children somebody should have, to determining how many vegetables that somebody should be eating in a day. There's a lot of incredible variables which would occur, and obviously some people can require a little bit more food than others to sustain their bodies. Some people have big frames, some people have small frames. There is a ridiculous amount of calculating factors which are occurring here, which would need to be applied in certain levels. Now, let's just say that how Zeitgeist could potentially work in a system of voluntary, a voluntary method. So the Zeitgeist method potentially could work by, say, there was some kind of collapse or fall in the government systems. The governments would no longer have the ability to even pay their military to extract any kind of wealth from the public, and maybe there would even be some certain kind of or shall we say, some kind of anarchy. Let's just say some kind of anarchy which is occurring. So there may be just some kind of arranged sources of governance which are occurring. Now, in the system here, what we have a number of highly intelligent computer literate programmers who are putting forth a centrally run system in which people are coding in what exactly the requirements are for this this city or this town or anything like that. So there is certain requirements and certain mandates, and the tricky part is obviously for a centrally run power is to see exactly what would be the most beneficial and what would be the least beneficial, and prioritizing the resources allocation into those means. So you have a couple of issues in terms of whether you have big drivers, like you want to be very expansionist, so you do not get taken over by any mafias which are in the local town. Maybe you want to protect, like have a large military to protect your Zeitgeist city from anybody else coming in and invading. There may be just certain requirements which may be environmentally a bit disastrous, but is required just to keep the sustainability of your system in place in the first place. Okay, so let's just say, for example, that whatever was coded was immediately very successful. There was a definite upsurge or uptick in the amount of resources which were being created, and rather than a mechanism of scarcity where people were finding themselves redundant or work was being redundant, there was in fact abundance of requirements of work to do in return for an abundance of goods or foods which were available, or leisure activities which were available. Now, that would be very interesting. I'd kind of like that myself. But, okay, so we just need some kind of things in terms of motivation here as well. So there is a little bit of a social problem within these towns, which may need to be addressed in some certain degree. In terms of the fact that we do like to be, we do have our own sexuality, and we do like to go up the ranks of sexuality, and we do like to seek out the pretty girls, or whatever the mandated requirement is in terms of the Zeitgeist movement, maybe the most intelligent girls, or like this can reverse in sexes, whatever happens. So there will be some kind of, in terms of just our own sexual nature, there may be certain types of requirements for us to, shall we say, go up the ladder and seek the higher sexual beings, so that we have a lot more of a higher chance to reproduce in the future. Survive and reproduce is the #1 mandate for human beings and most animals on this planet. So there is that sexual driver which may be problematic in even the sense of something of abundance, a situation of abundance, because you may have social degradation on the terms of where people would be acting in terms of shall we say, virtue, just trying to find the correct mate who would be monogamous with them and last a long time and be always resourceful in a situation. In a situation of abundance, then you may have a situation where people can just be free lovers, free this, free that, and you may have like wild sex party orgies. Sounds fantastic. But you may just have a bit of a social weirdness or social non-cohesion by the terms of where you're not having children being raised in two-parent families, and there isn't really sort of people that are looking after their young as much. Maybe the computers or the systems are working in place to look after them. It's just a little bit of a trickiness in terms of how how the problem of sex will just slowly start to tap away at a Zeitgeist movement-ish town. You will potentially have fairly dominant people in terms of some leaders in comparison to other leaders which will be less so dominant. Now, it's really hard in which how you would work out ways in which you could combat things like our sexuality and dominance and things like that, which could play a part. If you're seeing that there is a certain town or a certain village or some kind of Zeitgeist city where you're finding that you're a worker and you're achieving a lot more in terms of the amount of scientific knowledge that you're applying to the city, or the amount of work that you're providing to the city, which is benefiting loads of people, but yet you're not finding that there is a reward mechanism for that, then because abundance is already supplied in the first place, you really haven't got as much of a driver to strive and push yourself as hard as you can to keep in the game of the sex, or keep in the game of survive and reproduce. It's more of a re-augmentation of R strategy instead of K in terms of breeding scenarios. So you might have these problems. There is one option which might sound extremely disastrous, which would be some kind of IV sterilization of the sexual organs, stop or remove the implementation of sexual desires. Maybe that kind of way where you could change the sexual system to make man or make woman particular people in terms of the way that they can do certain social tasks. So as we get with like ants or with bees, you may have the queen or the computer, centralized computer. Then you may have certain drones which can do certain tasks. You may have the scientific class, and that may be able to be bred in a certain means and ways and fashions which would be kind of select for in terms of what the computers wanted. Maybe there would be certain searches of DNA codes to have certain genetic traits to be applied to certain workers. So that's one way of doing it. It sounds ridiculously scary to me, but that it potentially could be a method in which a Zeitgeist way could resolve the issue of sex and survival of the fittest. And when we say survival of the fittest, it's not necessarily about the strongest one survives, but the fittest mind, the fittest, the person that can apply themselves to the most virtue, the person that can be an entrepreneur, the person that can be a scientist. Really, it's those kind of fitness traits which is quite good, and when we've procreated with those people, then that has given us certain benefits to do more things in the future. So if over time we have been more so women have selected men with larger brain capacities, now that we've come from some kind of monkey rat creature now to what we are now with these gigantic heads, there has been certain selective breeding for more intelligent ones because they have been more successful in the way in which they can acquire resources. So if we are putting ourselves into a situation of abundance rather than scarcity, and there isn't anything of the resource requirements which would happen beforehand, then we've got this major problem of sex. So the one way to work around that is potentially some kind of thing of sterilization. But I think there is a lot of drivers and a lot of, shall we say, it's not necessarily drivers, but if the major component of man is this testosterone thing, this competitive nature does really push us in a certain field harder and harder and harder. And once you do start to play around with our sexual being, then that can have some very trippy consequences in terms of the way in which we view life itself, and potentially we may find ourselves even more so in a position where we, let's say we become more mechanized, we become more robotic, and we have less feelings, and let's say the word narcissist, or just less humanist sort of feeling, where we're not feeling much about anybody anymore. And if a couple of drones die in this experiment that we've done for this Zeitgeist town, then so what? We can just breed some more drones which can do the job for us. I mean, this is all fairly far-fetched, but if people can come back to me with certain answers which can solve the issue of, solve the issue of abundance, and how scarcity really works well with how selective breeding has gone for women finding men with resources, or even men finding women with resources, please let me know. Okay, so I just want to go back to the algorithm and the pricing mechanism, because that is an important thing to explore, and see how that could work a little bit further. So, let me return back to the sex thing. If I'm just trying to think if there's any kind of way in which you could sort of get around that system. I guess there could be some kind of reward system in place which may give an advantage to your genes, which could be passed on by the selection of the machines. So, or the machine that can decide upon, what shall we say, what skills and what advantages are better. So, what we're doing is creating some kind of Aryan race still. But say if you are more successful, you are a greater scientist than a lot of other people, you are more productive, you can come up with a lot more ideas, then potentially there could be some kind of area where you would be able to and would be enabled to have more than one wife, or you might be able to have a number of sexual partners to match the amount of production that you are doing. Now, that in that level, you still have the terms of abundance of food and resources, and everybody has accommodation and all those kind of things. But the sexual element of reproducing is slightly restricted, and you will have the option to procreate even harder if you are successful in the fields that you do. So that's another little idea of how you could do it. It still seems to me a little bit, you're thinking a lot more about oneself rather than the children that you're potentially creating out of a number of different women. So it's creating some kind of polygamy situation, which I don't think has been incredibly successful, but if I'm totally wrong here, just let me know. Okay, so yeah, that's just. I'm pleased I've come up with a different idea other than giving this extremely bleak view. But that's another idea of how which hard work could be rewarded in a situation of abundance. All right, or potentially just sort of some kind of I don't know, plaque or virtue thing where you're named after certain towns or whatever. There would need to be some kind of recognition of things that would happen, but I don't think it really matters too much. Yeah, you do have that issue of keeping people really focused and locked into wanting to stay in the game of working hard. Okay, so pricing mechanisms. We've got to fight this pricing mechanism situation. Okay, so there has to be this certain element of sustainability and energy, and a certain idea of the amount of people that are in existence and how that can be worked with, how that is managed, all of those beautiful things. So Energy would obviously have to be. You can work out the net output of energy anyway, in terms of energy fields, energy stations and things like that. So that calculation can be done. You can work out the amount of energy which is in the system, which can be used. But you would still need to be extremely sure of the scientific evidence in terms of damage to the environment. So in terms of the environment, you would need to be sure of like the damage that is being caused by pollution, seeing if it is reaching a tipping point level where the sustainable level of the environment, the actual life support system of the environment, cannot recover, or the time in which it's going to take to recover is not going to support the life in the future. Calculations based upon these things would need to be done, and really be done to such an incredible way, so that, because obviously you're predicting something in the future so far ahead, but you would need to get all the data from sort of solar sun cycles to a number of things. And obviously the weatherman isn't quite good to forecast what is going to happen in the next 7 years. So it is kind of a little bit tricky or dangerous in certain ways to work out sustainabilities of environments and really working a method for the future, because you got either a couple of scenarios which can play out. Either you're bang on right and everything seems to be going quite well. You're either incorrect with your environmental situation, and you could be one way or the other. So if you predict that the environment is going to be a lot worse in the future, but it's not, then you have misallocated or misused resources, and who knows the amount of people which have been lost, or the ideas that could have been lost, which could have really blossomed in humanity in that time. Or so if the situation is that you really thought that the environment was going to be a lot better than what you expected, and the environment really shut down on you, and you was in a bit of a situation, then there would have to be some kind of installment of really extremely draconian methods of getting the sustainability of the environment working again. So you may need to cull the population, or have population restrictions, all these kind of things done on a centralized level to combat the overpopulating human race, or planting a shitload of trees in the forests. Whatever would need to be done, there would need to be some kind of extreme movement of how to recover from an environmental prediction which was gone wrong. Okay, so that is one very difficult thing, but let's just say we have found a really good methodology of working to see how the planet can be sustainable. Or at least let's just say we're really just going to try and push that planet to be a lot more sustainable than what it already is today. So the one mandate of the Zeitgeist movement to make sure that tomorrow is going to be a much more cleaner, more bluer skied day than what today is. That is the major mandate, and if it's not, then there needs to be a redoubling of efforts to ensure that that happens. It is going to be a motherfucker of a way to try and fight the environment to make sure that you're getting exactly the requirements which would sustain human life as best as possible. You see, there's certain animals in this world that probably kind of like a slightly hotter environment. There's certain animals that require a slightly less of a hotter environment. Most of the humans have moved to the land masses, which are quite nicely sustainable for most humans. So it just really means that if the planet gets a lot hotter, then a lot more people would start probably considering moving to Antarctica. And if the planet started to get a lot more cooler, a lot more people would start to really think about moving to the equator. So, all right. neither here nor there. Okay, so let's just say that we've worked out certain systems in which we can work out how to sustain the environment. We've got a little bit of an issue here because we might be living beside other state countries. So if you're trying to be very environmentally friendly and this state country next to you is using this big coal fire power station, you are really going to have a problem in terms of that it's probably going to costing you a lot more higher production levels to install some solar panels and things like that, some really high-tech technology which is going to give you greener, sustainable energy, whereas next door to you, you've got this state which is polluting the air. That's going to be a problem in itself, so you would either need to not trade with them or put certain embargoes on them to stop them from doing that, or you may need to use force and take them over, which again is immoral in itself. But if your mandate was to rid the world or save the planet, and you definitely had 100% sure, or to the 99.90% of a degree sureness that you had the correct idea, then oh shit, sorry about that. Then yeah, you may have the mandate to take over and kick another little mafia town's ass to ensure that they're not using the gas-fired power, coal power, because everybody will destroy themselves. So in an act of self-defense for everybody, you potentially could have the mandate to protect the planet. It's a very tricky line, and unless you really was sure about the situation, it's going to be even harder. And there's a lot of rulings for corruption here as well, particularly if you're in the act of war. So it's kind of strange, but let's just say there is a mass adoption of the Zeitgeist movement. Everybody is thinking of the environment and thinking how we can live in a world of abundance, and is deciding to adopt these highly computerized city centers. So the next one up would be that we've got the workings of energy, we've got the workings of the environment. So those calculations are in there, they're available, and they are right in the system. Then we've got I've mentioned this a little bit earlier, the system of priority. Who and what and in which we are prioritizing first. Now, you've got a couple of things that you could do here. So if your two mandates is to save the environment and the other thing is to create abundance or raise the living standards of all, you potentially could just put or funnel a lot of resources or a lot of people or scientists into one extreme discipline to accomplish a certain goal. But the problem is that how do you calculate the degree of which the best resources are into this role? Sometimes you might need biologists to look at a physical or physics problem. There might be certain things where there might be certain resources which may need to be transferred into another. And the problem is that how do you work out the correct degree of resource allocation, more so of intelligent minds than anything else? And if you did say, okay, right, well, if we know that we're saving the environment now, that's pretty good. But if we can get abundant energy or abundance in energy, then we're really going to get a masterclass of everything else. Because once we've solved the problem of abundant energy, then we can really seek out the next option, which would be better or more efficient ways of keeping the environment sustained. So it's what you potentially could do, and this is maybe the problem which could arise, is that you could have a ridiculous amount of scientists and effort and resources all focused upon one special sphere of finding abundant energy. And maybe there would have been certain scientific advances which would occur because of that. But for the amount of resource allocation into that and the degree of which the return would be, imagine if the greatest levels of abundance have already been worked out already in solar panels and everything else. Then there could have been an incredible misallocation of resources, all funneling into one extreme scientific discipline. That there could have been something else which would have been on the horizon that's just not been looked at, which could have revolutionized humankind itself. Maybe we could have turned ourselves into miniature people so that we can just sustain ourselves in that way. So we could be there could be, who knows, the inventions which are going to be created in the future which will resolve the problems in today. So the problem arises in the sense that if you have this centrally planned, prioritized situation of working around finding the most important goals, like a cure for cancer, a cure for growing crops in strange deserts, any of these things, then you may have missed a trick with something else. Alright, so let's just say, for example, that the computer system really does know how to get the best out of people. It's working by a system of finding failures. So it's seeing a failure occur. So it's saying, okay, we've found out that there's certain algorithmic problems in terms of this resource allocation. We found this perfect idealism of balancing intelligence and resources in this harmonious level. Maybe they're trying it in a number of different cities all around the world, and one of the cities seemed to be the most successful at re-augmenting the intelligence and resources in a certain level, in a certain fashion. Then the signal gets sent out to all the other Zeitgeist cities, and then they start to find that the productivity and the amount of discovery which is being created from this is rapidly advancing. Now, it's possible. It is possible that there is certain more efficient ways to manage than others. So you would have a situation now where, okay, let's say there are certain levels of scientific discoveries and so on and so forth. How does the computer know what is important and what isn't important? Now, we know obviously that we've said abundant energy may be important, but who knows exactly really what a human being wants from one day to the other? Sometimes people like things in less degrees than others. Sometimes some people like a lot of energy, some people like a cure for cancer. It's really tricky to determine that what even the rate of discovery and which discovery is occurring is benefiting people as to what the desires of their requirements are. It's really tricky. Say if everybody's trying to, if the systems are really working out about the sustainability of things and trying to work out things like cures for cancer and things like that, that may be all well and good, but some people like to play entertainment games or maybe like to use virtual reality. There's all these little areas which may be lost, and in terms of the life and the style in which people like to express themselves and be themselves may be totally rubbed out in terms of culture, just for the ultimate goal of trying to obtain abundant energy. So that's just some of the important factors which just need to be applied, but you could get a number of Zeitgeist systems which are in power, regenerating the life support systems of the planet, and have got some kind of centralized algorithmic methodology of finding the highest amount of efficiency in the way that it applies its resources and the intelligence of the computers as well as the people. Let me just try and think if there's anything else that I would like to add to this. Yeah, there is a number of tricky factors of this, and I think probably one of the most trickiest ones, the one that obviously I've sort of tried to advise on, is the way in which anarcho-capitalism can be adopted. Is really tricky in which the way of how a Zeitgeist movement can be widely adopted. I mentioned before that with a anarcho-capitalist society, you could potentially have a system in which you have an ownership system, or a system in which there's a ledger in which everybody has ownership and people can work and trade, exchange value off of that ledger system, and that could be encrypted and coded so that there will be no hacking of it, and there could be a lot of things flourishing. Just please check my thing about anarchism gaining political party. It'll be something on those lines, or anarchic capitalism as a political party. There has been, I tried to go through all the ideas in which how that could come into power. The problem with the Zeitgeist movement is that you potentially are working with a way of trying to use self-defense to obtain your means, and self-defense is a very murky water in itself. You're potentially using methodologies of trying to predict things in the future of benefits of what man wants in the now. And although sometimes people really are pretty dumb, some people like to watch porn and spend a lot of their money and resources on porn so that more porn stars come around in this world. But that's something that people like to do, and that is an entertainment, and that even though that might seem vulgar, or that might seem a total waste of resources and energy and time and effort and immoral, it is something of the human psyche which potentially is being diminished by the central power of authority, which is guiding and channeling the root of man to what potentially could be more efficient, but maybe not what inspires the artistic mind or the spiritual mind. I know from a philosopher it's pretty tricky to say these kind of things, but the mind of freedom and expression, which potentially could be curtailed by centralized authority to know what is best for man. Yeah, so I think that's really good. I'm going to round it up at that point there. If you really, I'm really interested to find out if there's good counter arguments against what things that I've said, or you think that there is potential for a movement into Zeitgeist and the adoption could be done quite easily if we get people to voluntarily sign up to the Zeitgeist movement around the world, or there could be a method in terms of a golden moment where a country fails and the Zeitgeist movement can quickly adopt this system which can come into place, or the system is already built, or things like that, and there's a working model where the system is running a town centre right now, and potentially that could just gradually build out slowly, but you still need some certain level of adoption which would occur. And the Zeitgeist movement does have an issue of competing against non-environmentally friendly systems. So yeah, let me know if you've got any good ideas or counter arguments against these theories or ideas that I'm putting forward to how the Zeitgeist centralized town systems could work. If you think there is better models and I'm really missing the point at certain levels, then please let me know in the comments, and yeah, I would be fascinated to hear from you, and I can definitely do a run-up to this podcast at a later date once I have got and gathered more information. thank you very much for your time, and we will be back for more shenanigans. Thank you, and let me shut down. I can't find the shutdown button, and it's really annoying. Okay, right, here's the shutdown button. Alright, catch you later. Bye-bye.